So let's look real quick at the playoffs. I'm curious what you think. Do you think it matters who the Jays play in the wild card? I know Adam and I have talked about this quite a bit, and we both kind of lean towards the side of if you can't beat whoever it is you're playing in the wild card, good luck against the Astros. Are you kind of in the same camp?
Yeah, I think that is a good way to look at it. Like you're going to have to beat better teams than the Rays and the Mariners to win the World Series. But I also think they're like good teams. They're teams
Mm-hmm.
that kind of like the Blue Jays are in a much better position with this best 2 out of 3 than they would be for a 1 game wild card. Like the especially the Mariners and Blue Jays are kind of built like a best 2 out of 3 team with 2, 3 really good starting pitchers and then kind of those big game players that they can get, like Julio Rodriguez versus Vlad in a wild card
Oh my
series would be
God.
really fun to
So
watch.
cool.
I think the big thing for me is I don't want to be traveling to Seattle. And I think maybe that's a personal thing where I don't want to have to go across the country to Seattle on 1 day's notice. Like that's maybe my bias sneaking in there, but like they finished game 162 in Baltimore. If Seattle's the 1 seed and they're the 2, they're going across the country to Seattle, starting a series. Like maybe you send like Manoa the day before to get him rested and not have to worry about that flight shenanigans.
Right.
But like that's a lot of stuff you're worrying about that a Seattle team playing at home would not have to worry about. So, and like Tampa, they make that trip all the time. We know what the trop is, but I think you would probably rather be going to Tampa or hosting either of those teams than having to make the trip across the continent.
I could be crazy. I know I've talked to friends who are big Jays fans and mentioned this too, and they're like, "You're insane." But I would rather Tampa. I would rather Tampa over the Mariners. I'd rather Tampa over Cleveland.
Hmm. Interesting.
I just I don't fear Tampa's offense. Don't get me wrong, their pitching is great, but so is Cleveland's, so is Seattle's. I don't think that when it comes to starting depth, anyways, we line up any better against any one of the others. Do you, when you look at those, like, do you lean one way or the other? I know we just talked about how it doesn't really matter, but is there a team you'd prefer to play?
I think Cleveland. I
Cleveland?
like,
Okay, that's fair.
but also you're going to Cleveland if you play Cleveland, which is
Yes.
I think like they're all kind of close enough in talent that I'm just playing for home field. I think that's the only kind of differentiator you can have at this point is like whether I'm playing at home or if I'm going to Seattle, going to Cleveland, going to Tampa. I do think Tampa's interesting because like there's a chance they're throwing like bullpen day, Ryan Yarbrough, Drew Rasmussen. There's also a chance they're going like McClanahan, Glass now, Rasmussen. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
in their Baz even too could come back. Like their pitching is very up in the air right now. Kind of guys maybe not coming back from injury. There's a little too unknown there for me to be cheering for a matchup against the Rays because like if they get Glasnow back for like 3 innings in one of those games,
Yeah.
McClanahan gets healthy again. If Baz comes back, they can be dangerous.
See, now
I
for
mean,
me,
they're
this
dangerous without him. Go ahead, Adam.
this might be a little bit of like putting the cart before the horse, but like I have my eyes on the Astros, and for me, I would just rather play the Astros in a 5 game series than a 7 game series. So if we can play them in the ALDS instead of wait until the ALCS, for me, that seems like the advantage. So am
Yeah,
I
that's
wrong?
it. But then like you're then like let's say you start stripling in game 3, you got Barrios in game 1 of that 5 game series. Then you got 2 games of Justin Verlander versus Jose Barrios. And I don't care how good Barrios is, matching up twice against Verlander when you kind of only get one start from Gosman and Manoa in that series, like that's
That's a good way of putting
you're
it
going to have to
too.
win the other 3 games probably. So
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah, you're
I
not
think the
wrong
Astros
there.
are so good and their pitching is so deep that
God, their pitching is
it's going to
deep.
be difficult no matter how you match up with them. But
Do you think we have a better chance than in a 7 game series instead of going
yes,
against
probably
Verlander
just
twice?
because like the variables are lower and like you get one lucky win in a 5 game series and it makes it easier than one lucky win in a 7. But I do think it's more that I think they would probably match up better against the Yankees in a 5 game series than the Astros in a 5 game series.
Okay.
So Adam and I, Mitch, have talked about this all season. I'm sure you've written about it and talked about it yourself. We've gone back and forth on the catching situation and how it looks next year or even a couple years down the road. And all season, I kind of felt like Kirk was most likely the odd man out for the reason of the DH situation and the construction of this roster and how many guys need that DH day currently playing on the Blue Jays. Obviously, this could all change, and there's a lot of moving parts to this question, but now I almost lean towards keeping Kirk after watching the season that he has put together and how we talked about just earlier, right? When we were talking pitching. You even brought it up. You don't know what prospects are going to hit or not, and it's not that I doubt Gabriel Moreno, but to just bet that he's for sure going to do what Kirk is going to did, right? Like to just think that he can step in and kind of take over that role is asking a lot of a rookie, no matter how high the ceiling on him as a prospect is. Do you think Kirk can catch in a more full-time role next season? And do you think that they may be leaning towards keeping Kirk this year? Or do you think, I know there's even talk that Moreno doesn't even need to necessarily catch and they keep all three?
Yeah, I think coming into the season, my unreported just opinion was that Jansen was probably the odd man out. I know the Blue Jays really like Jansen. They see him as like the intangibles guy on this team, like something that the numbers just don't truly encapsulate. They like his game calling, even though I think I'm and some other people are a little lower on it, but they really like how he manages the pitching staff. But I think as opposed to maybe switching from keeping Jansen to keeping Kirk to trading Moreno, I've now in the last few weeks been under the impression that there's a chance they come back with all three of these guys. And I don't know if that means all three start in the 26-man roster. Maybe Moreno starts back in AAA, but I think we've seen Moreno try out some funky positions in practice. There was always that third base experiment. I think there's a chance that they just like what each of those three guys bring, because they bring something very, very different.
Very different.
You run it back for one more year. You maybe punt on the catching equation one more year. You have Kirk and Jansen as kind of your 50-50 duo. You bring Moreno up when you think he's ready, and you just kind of make it work. We've seen them run a really deep bench for the last few weeks now, and it's, I think, really given John Schneider a weapon to work with, and I think his bench usage has been some of his best managing. So if you can figure out how to do that with giving Moreno some experience in the outfield, giving him a little infield experience too, and just kind of being a super utility guy back there, it could work for a year. Probably not a long-term fix. One of these guys is definitely going to go eventually. It's just how it's going to work. But I'm less convinced it's going to happen this offseason.